The rain came down like it was trying to wash the city clean. It never worked. Seoul swallowed the rain the same way it swallowed everything else, quietly without apology, and left no trace behind. The alley behind Mapo Bridge sat between two forgotten buildings, the kind of place where the street lights had been broken for so long that nobody remembered they were supposed to work. Puddles stretched across cracked asphalt. The smell of wet concrete and rotting garbage hung in the air. It was the kind of alley nobody walked through if they had a choice. Han Jae-min had no choice. Not tonight. Please, I promise my mom to get to 1,000 subscribers before Easter. Please help me make my dream come true by hitting the subscribe button, like, and commenting where you're watching from. Thank you. He was 53 years old, gray at the temples, with the kind of face that had spent too many years in boardrooms and not enough years resting. His suit, charcoal gray tailored, was already soaked through. His briefcase was gone. His phone was gone. His wallet and the silver watch his late wife had given him on their anniversary 20 years ago, gone. He was on his knees in a puddle, one hand pressed to the ground, the other holding his ribs, and there was blood mixing with rainwater beneath his palm. 3 men stood around him. They weren't in a hurry. That was the first thing that told a careful observer this was not a robbery. Robbers rushed. They grabbed and ran and disappeared into the dark. These men moved like they had all the time in the world. Like they had already been paid, and the only thing left was the finishing. The biggest one, thick neck, short hair, a scar running from his left ear to his jaw, rolled his shoulders and took a slow step forward. The other 2 flanked him like wings. One cracked his knuckles. The other just watched, arms loose at his sides, unbothered. Han Jae-min looked up at them through one eye. The other was already swollen shut, and said nothing. There was nothing left to say. He had said no. He had said it 3 times in 3 different meetings, to 3 different men in expensive suits who smiled too much and spoke too softly. He had said no to signing the document that would have buried every piece of evidence he had spent 18 months collecting. And now those same men, or rather the one man behind all of them, had sent a different kind of message. The big man raised his foot. Stop. The voice came from the mouth of the alley. It was not loud. It was not a scream. It was the kind of voice that cut through noise the way a knife cuts through water. Clean, precise, and completely without fear. All 3 men turned. She stood at the alley entrance, small and still in the falling rain. She wore a white school uniform blouse and a navy skirt, both soaked flat against her skin. Her school bag hung from one shoulder. Her black hair was plastered to her forehead and cheeks. She was 16 years old, and she looked like she had simply taken a wrong turn on the way home. She had not taken a wrong turn. Kim Era stood at the entrance to that alley and looked at the 3 men with the same expression she used when she looked at everything else in her life, like she was solving a problem and had already identified all the variables. Her dark eyes moved once across the scene, the man on the ground bleeding, the 3 attackers, the spacing between them, the width of the alley, the wet ground beneath their feet. She took one slow breath. The big man blinked at her. Then he laughed. It was the kind of laugh that came from a man who had never once been surprised by anything smaller than him. Go home, little girl, he said. His voice was rough and almost bored. Before you see something you can't forget. Air did not move. She did not run. She did not look away. She stood in the rain and watched him the way someone watches a clock, patiently knowing exactly what is about to happen next. The big man stopped laughing. Something in her stillness made the air change. The one with the cracked knuckles glanced at his partner. The 3rd man shifted his weight from one foot to the other. None of them could explain why they felt suddenly uncomfortable. She was a teenage girl in a wet school uniform. She weighed maybe 50 kilograms. She had no weapon, no phone visible, no backup behind her. And yet, nobody moved for 3 full seconds. Then the big man shook his head and started walking toward her. Wrong place, wrong time, he muttered, reaching out to grab her shoulder and shove her back into the street. His hand never reached her. What happened next lasted less than 2 seconds, but every part of it was precise the way surgery is precise. The way 10 years of training transforms reflex into something that looks almost slow, because every motion is exactly where it is supposed to be and nothing is wasted. Era's left hand came up and redirected his reaching arm, not blocking it, not fighting it, but guiding it sideways with just enough pressure to pull him slightly off his own center. Her right foot stepped in, closing the distance between them so fast he had no time to process it. Her hip dropped. Her weight shifted down and forward in a single fluid rotation, and her right arm hooked through his extended arm at the elbow, locking it, controlling it completely. Then she turned. He left the ground. The sound of Han Jae-min's attacker hitting the wet asphalt was not a thud. It was a crack, sharp, sudden, and absolute, the way a door slams when the wind catches it. The impact echoed off both walls of the narrow alley and bounced back, louder than it should have been. The big man's body hit the ground and did not bounce. He lay there with one arm twisted at a wrong angle and his face turned sideways in the puddle, and for 2 full seconds he did not make a sound. Era stepped back. He straightened. Her hands came back to her sides. She waited. The other 2 men stared. The one with the cracked knuckles had his mouth open. The third had taken 2 steps backward without realizing it. They looked at the man on the ground. They looked at the girl standing over him. They looked at each other. The leader tried to push himself up. His arm gave out. He made a sound, low, involuntary, the sound of someone who does not want to show pain but cannot help it. He tried again. His left leg scrambled in the puddle. He could not get up. Era looked at the 2 standing men. She said nothing. He did not need to. They ran. They did not look back. Their footsteps slapped against the wet concrete and faded into the sound of the rain, and then the alley was quiet except for Han Jae-min's ragged breathing and the soft drum of water against asphalt. Era turned away from the man on the ground and knelt beside Han Jae-min. Her hands moved quickly but carefully, checking his pulse at the wrist, tilting his head to check his airway, pressing 2 fingers to the side of his neck. His breathing was shallow but steady. 2 broken ribs, she guessed. Possibly a concussion. His right eye was swollen badly. The cut above his brow was still bleeding. She had already called emergency services before she stepped into the alley. The ambulance was 4 minutes out. "Stay still," she said quietly. "Don't try to move." Han Jae-min turned his one open eye toward her. He looked at this girl kneeling in the rain beside him. This stranger, this teenager who had walked into an execution and simply refused to let it happen, and he did not have words. He tried to speak. She shook her head once. "Don't talk. Just breathe." He breathed. She stayed beside him until the red and blue lights appeared at the end of the alley, and then she stood, stepped back and let the paramedics through. She answered the police officers' questions in a calm, flat voice. She gave them her name. She gave them her school. She told them what she saw and what she did. She did not exaggerate. She did not minimize. And then she asked if she could leave because she had school in the morning. The officer stared at her for a long moment. He nodded. She walked home in the rain. What she did not know, what none of them knew yet, was that 30 meters from the alley entrance, a delivery driver named Park Sung-ho had been sheltering under a convenience store awning, waiting for the rain to ease before he got back on his scooter. He had heard the sounds from the alley. He had pulled out his phone, not sure what he was going to find, and started recording. He had captured the last 90 seconds. The big man walking toward Era, the throw, the impact, the 2 men running, and then Era kneeling calmly beside the injured billionaire in the rain. Park Sung-ho looked at the footage on his small phone screen for a long time. Then he uploaded it to his social media account with a single line of caption. "Unbelievable. Some girl just threw a giant man like he was nothing. Mapo tonight." He had 47 followers. By morning he had 47,000. By the time Kim Era walked into her first class the next day, the clip had been shared 900,000 times. By noon it had passed 3 million. Era did not own a smartphone. She found out from her older brother, Kim Dae-young, who was 24 and worked double shifts at a logistics company to keep their small rooftop apartment above Mapo-gu. He was waiting for her when she came through the door that afternoon, his face pale, his phone extended toward her. "Era," he said. "You need to see this." She watched the clip once. She handed the phone back. She went to the kitchen and started making rice. "You're not going to say anything?" Dae-young said. "What do you want me to say?" "I want you to explain what I just watched my little sister do." She added water to the pot and set it on the burner. "I stopped something that needed to be stopped." Her brother sat down at the small table. He put his head in his hands. For a long moment neither of them spoke. The rain had started again outside. It pattered against the thin roof of their apartment, and through the single window they could see the gray rooftops of the city stretching in every direction. "Master Choi is going to be upset," Dae-young finally said. Master Choi would have done the same thing. He could not argue with that. Master Choi Bong-soo was 71 years old, walked with a slight limp from an injury he had never explained, and ran a tiny dojo in the basement of a building 3 streets over. He had trained ROK Special Forces for 15 years before something had made him stop. He never spoke about what that something was. Now he taught one student at a time, and he had been teaching Kim Era since she was 6 years old, when her father, his old student, had brought her to him and said, "She's going to need to know how to protect herself in this world." Her father had been right. The world had taken both her parents before Era turned 11, and it had left behind a girl who was quiet and small and invisible at school, and utterly, completely dangerous in ways that no one around her ever suspected. She did not compete. She did not demonstrate. He did not talk about it. It was not a hobby. It was not a sport. It was the most private part of her life, and she had just put it in front of 3 million strangers on the internet. She turned the burner to low. "I'll talk to him tomorrow," she said. She did not sleep well that night. The next morning it was 10 million. The clip had crossed onto every major platform. Sports channels were posting slow-motion frame breakdowns with commentary from martial arts experts. A former Olympic judo coach appeared on a morning show and said, "What she executed there is a classical Hapkido arm lever throw modified. The timing is extraordinary. Whoever trained this girl is a master." A self-defense instructor with 2 million subscribers online spent 20 minutes analyzing the footwork alone. The phrase "mystery schoolgirl" was trending in 4 languages. But the online world was not one thing. It never was. Alongside the admiration, something else was growing. Questions. A reporter at a major digital news outlet posted a thread. "We don't know who this girl is. We don't know why she was in that alley. We don't know the full story of what happened. Let's be careful before we make someone a hero." The thread spread faster than the praise. Comments split into camps overnight. Some said she was brave. Some said she was trained for violence. Some said the whole thing looked rehearsed. Someone started a rumor, no source, no evidence, that the attack on Han Jae-min had been staged for insurance purposes, and that the girl was an accomplice. The rumor spread. 2 days after the attack, Era arrived at school to find her homeroom teacher waiting at the classroom door. "The vice principal wants to see you," the teacher said, avoiding her eyes. The vice principal's office smelled like old coffee and new anxiety. The man himself sat behind his desk with his hands folded and the expression of someone who had been told to handle a problem he did not create and did not want. "We've received several complaints," he said. "From parents. They're concerned about having a student in the school who has demonstrated violent behavior." Era sat across from him with her hands folded in her lap. "I stopped 3 men from killing someone," she said. "Yes, well." He cleared his throat. "The situation is being investigated. Until there is clarity, it would be better if—" "Am I being suspended?" He looked uncomfortable. "We're asking you to take a few days at home. For your own safety. There's a great deal of media attention and—" "For my own safety," Era repeated. He did not answer. He picked up her bag. "I understand," she said and walked out. That same afternoon, someone slid a folded piece of paper under the door of her brother's apartment. It had no signature. It said, "The girl should learn to stay out of things that don't involve her. This is your one warning." Dae-young found it when he came home. He stood in the hallway holding it for a long time. When Era came out of her room and saw his face, she held out her hand without a word. He gave it to her. She read it. She folded it carefully and set it on the table. "We need to move," Dae-young said. "No," she said. "Era. Moving sends a message. Staying sends a different one." She looked at him steadily. "I'm not going anywhere." Her brother looked at her. This girl who had been quietly terrifying since she was small, and said nothing more. He went to the kitchen and made tea. It was all he could think to do. 2 floors up from where Era's brother was making tea, in the private ward of Seoul National University Hospital, Han Jae-min was watching the video for the 14th time. He had 2 cracked ribs, a mild concussion, and a cut above his right brow that had required 6 stitches. He was going to be fine. The doctor had said so. His personal assistant had said so. His legal team had said so. Everyone kept saying he was going to be fine, as though repetition would accelerate the fact. What Han Jae-min kept thinking about was not his ribs or his stitches. He kept thinking about the 60 seconds in that alley, the sound of his own blood mixing with rainwater, the certainty that the next blow was the one that would not stop, and then that voice. So, he paused the video at the moment the big man went down. He looked at the girl's face. Even in the low-quality phone footage, in the rain, in the dark, he could see it clearly. She was not afraid. She was not angry. She was focused in the way a surgeon is focused. Clean, present, and completely without hesitation. She had called the ambulance before she went in. He had confirmed this with the police report. She had assessed the situation, made the call, and then walked into a 3-against-1 assault on a grown man and ended it in 2 seconds. She was 16 years old. Han Jae-min was a man who had spent 30 years reading people across conference tables. He could identify ambition and fear and dishonesty in the angle of a jaw and the speed of a blink. He looked at this girl on his phone screen and read something different. He read someone who had spent a long time being invisible and had made peace with it. Not because she was weak, but because she understood that the world did not need to know what she was capable of until it mattered. He lowered his phone. He called his legal team. "Find out everything about her," he said. "But carefully. No press. No leaks. I want the full picture before anyone says a word." While Han Jae-min's team was building a picture, a different team was working much faster. Director Kang Hyun-woo had not survived 20 years at the top of one of Korea's most powerful conglomerates by being slow. He was 60 years old, trim, with silver hair and the kind of face that never showed what it was thinking. He sat in his corner office on the 38th floor of the Kang Industries Tower and watched the video on his wall screen in silence. When it ended, he turned it off. "How did this happen?" he said. It was not a question. His assistant, standing near the door, did not answer because there was no good answer. Director Kang stood and walked to the window. Below him, Seoul moved in its usual relentless way. Traffic and light and 10 million people going about their lives, none of them knowing what had been arranged the night before, what had almost been finished. What had been interrupted by a girl in a school uniform. He needed the video gone. He needed the girl gone. Not physically, not anymore. That option had already complicated things past the point where more complication helped. He needed her reputation gone. Her credibility. Her story. "I want pressure applied," he said. "On the school. On her neighborhood. Make it look organic. People who are concerned about a violent teenager. Parents worried about their children. I want doubt, not sympathy. And I want the 3 who failed me." He stopped. "Make sure they stay quiet." His assistant nodded and left. Director Kang turned back to the window. Somewhere in this city, Han Jae-min was alive in a hospital bed, and 18 months of careful work was still potentially exposed. One teenage girl had changed the entire shape of the problem. He would need to change the shape back. The police investigation moved quickly once it became clear that Han Jae-min was not simply the victim of a random robbery. Han's legal team fed information carefully, enough to guide investigators toward the right evidence without exposing the full scope of what Han knew. Phone records placed 2 of the 3 attackers in contact with a number registered to a shell company. Financial transactions pointed to a third party. The third attacker, the one Era had put on the ground, had a dislocated shoulder and a fractured elbow, and he was sitting in a hospital bed under police guard, and he was very uncomfortable and he was thinking very carefully about his future. On the 5th day he talked. He did not give them everything. But he gave them enough. He confirmed the attack had been ordered. He confirmed it was not a robbery. He confirmed there was a name behind the instruction. A name given to them through 2 layers of intermediary, but a name nonetheless. Kang Hyun-woo. The name moved through the investigation team like a current. Kang Industries was not a small company. Director Kang was not a small man. This was not a case anymore. This was a situation, and it required careful handling at levels above the initial investigating officers. Senior investigators were brought in. The case was sealed from media. Evidence was secured. And someone, nobody could confirm who, quietly tipped off 2 journalists who had spent years documenting the edges of exactly this kind of story. The pressure on Era did not ease during those days. It got worse. 3 more anonymous complaints were filed with her school, claiming she had a history of violent behavior. Someone created a fake social media profile using her name and school photo and posted aggressive content under it. The profile spread before it was flagged and taken down, but the screenshots lived on. Her brother received 2 more notes. A group of older boys at school, not students she knew, not students from her class, started appearing near the school gates when she came and went. She noticed. She adjusted her routes. She said nothing to her brother about the boys. Master Choi, when she finally went to see him, was sitting in his dojo drinking green tea, watching a small television on a stool in the corner. The clip was playing on it. He did not look up when she came in. She sat across from him and waited. After a long moment he picked up the remote and turned the television off. He set his cup down. He looked at her. "You used the outer lever," he said. "It was the right tool for the situation," she said. He was quiet for another moment. Then he nodded once. "Yes," he said. "It was." He picked up his tea again. "You called emergency services first." "Of course." "Good." He looked at the blank television screen. "They are going to come looking for me now," he said. "Probably. I am not interested in being on television." "Neither am I." He almost smiled. It was the closest thing to approval she had ever seen on his face in 10 years of training, and she held it quietly inside, the way you hold a small warmth against the cold. "Whatever comes," he said, "you stand in your center. You remember where your weight is. You do not let them pull you off your ground." "Understood." "Understood," she said. She bowed and she left, and she walked home through streets where people sometimes recognized her from the video and pointed, and sometimes said things kind or unkind, and she kept her eyes forward and her pace steady and her hands loose at her sides. The formal investigation interview happened on a Tuesday, 11 days after the attack. Era sat in a small room with a detective named Oh Se-jin, a woman in her 40s with short hair and a very direct way of looking at people. They asked her everything. When had she first heard the conversation about the alley tonight? How had she known something was wrong? Why had she gone toward the sounds instead of away from them? Whether she had known who the victim was. Whether she had any prior connection to Han Jae-min or anyone in his circle. Whether she had been paid or instructed to be there. She answered everything clearly in the same flat, composed voice she used for everything. She had heard two men talking. She had recognized the quality of what they were describing. She had followed her instincts. She had not known who the victim was. She had no connection to Han Jae-min. No one had paid her or told her to be anywhere. Detective O watched her for a long moment when she finished. "You were not afraid," the detective said. It was half question, half observation. Era considered this honestly. "I was focused," she said. "There wasn't space for afraid." Oh Se-jin wrote something in her notebook. Then she looked up. "You're 16, she said. "And you made the call before you went in. You planned for his extraction before you engaged." Era did not know what to do with the detective's tone. It was not suspicious. It was something closer to careful, measured respect. "I needed him to have medical care," she said simply. That was the point. Oh Se-jin closed her notebook. "You're done here," she said. "You're not a suspect. You are a witness and she paused, selected a word, "a material civilian participant in an active investigation. We'll need you to remain available." She stood. "Thank you for coming in." Era stood and bowed. She left the room. In the hallway she let out a single long breath. Just one. Then she straightened and walked to the elevator. The case broke publicly 2 weeks later. Han Jae-min's legal team, working in coordination with the investigators, released a controlled package of evidence to 2 trusted journalists simultaneously. The story ran in the early morning and spread through Korean media like a fire through dry grass. Director Kang Hyun-woo had orchestrated the assault on Han Jae-min to prevent him from releasing evidence of a corruption network involving falsified government contracts worth hundreds of billions of won. 3 men had been hired through shell intermediaries. 1 had confessed. Financial trails had been reconstructed. Phone records had been recovered. Director Kang was arrested at his home at 6 a.m. He was wearing a suit as though he had expected it and wanted to face it dressed correctly. He did not say anything as the officers led him out. His face was completely still. The story consumed Korean media for days. And within it, another story surfaced. The story of the girl. The real story. The timeline was reconstructed publicly. She had entered after the assault began. She had used the minimum force necessary to stop it. She had already called emergency services. She had stayed and cooperated with police. She had answered every question. Every single piece of evidence pointed in the same direction. She had saved a man's life. That was the complete truth. The fake social media profile, the anonymous complaints, the pressure on her school. Investigators traced these back to a communications consultant who had been paid through the same network that connected to Kang Hyunwoo. The consultant was brought in for questioning. The school received a formal notification clearing Era of all concerns. The vice principal called her personally. She let him speak. She said she understood. She did not make it easy for him. The public shifted the way a tide shifts. Slowly, completely, with the inevitability of something that had only ever been going in one direction. The clip, which had already reached 30 million views, began to climb again. Era did not watch the coverage. She went back to school. She sat in her usual seat at the back of the class. She ate her lunch on the rooftop alone the way she always had. She was the same person she had always been. The world had simply learned to see her differently. 2 months after the night in the alley, a letter arrived at her apartment. It was from the legal office of Han Jae-min. Inside was a formal document outlining a scholarship fund, full coverage for her university education and any graduate study she chose to pursue, at any institution in Korea that accepted her. There was a second document, a small monthly stipend for her brother to help stabilize their household costs while she completed her schooling. And there was a handwritten note on plain paper in careful, unpretentious handwriting. It said, "I would like to thank you in person if you are willing. There is no obligation. But some things deserve to be said face to face." Her brother read the documents 3 times. He set them down. He put his hand over his mouth. His eyes were bright. Era read the handwritten note once. She set it on the table. She thought about it for a long time. She wrote back. 1 line, "I'll meet you. But I won't accept money. Only the education." The meeting happened at a small cafe near Mapo. Her choice of location, her choice of time. Han Jae-min arrived without an assistant, without a driver, without the briefcase or the suit. He wore dark trousers and a gray jacket and looked like someone who had spent 2 months thinking hard about who he wanted to be. He stood when she came through the door and bowed. She bowed back. She sat down. For a while neither of them said very much. They ordered tea. The cafe was quiet. Outside, the October light was thin and clear, and Seoul moved past the window in its relentless way. Then Han Jae-min looked at her and said, "Why?" She knew what he meant. Why had she gone in? Why had she stayed? Why had she, a girl with nothing to gain and everything to lose, walked into the dark and stood between a stranger and the end of his life? Era thought about this. Not the polished version, not the version she had given to the camera or the detective. The real version. "Because I heard it," she said. "And I could do something about it. And those 2 things together." She stopped. "I don't know how to explain it differently. If you hear something and you can do something about it, then you have to. That's all it is." Han Jae-min looked at her. He nodded slowly as though this confirmed something he had already believed. "I'm going to build something," he said. "A youth program. Self-defense. For schools that don't have resources. For kids who," he stopped. Started again. "For kids like you were. Who need to know they can take care of themselves in a world that doesn't always look out for them." "That's good," Era said. "I'd like your input. Not your name. Not your face on a poster. Just your knowledge of what a kid in that position actually needs." She looked at him across the table. She was quiet for a moment. "I'll think about it," she said. He nodded. He did not push. They finished their tea. They bowed on the pavement outside. He got into a car. Modest, nothing flashy, and she walked home the 3 blocks to her rooftop apartment, and she stood at the window and looked out at the city for a long time. 3 months later, in a small rented room that smelled like floor polish and old wood, not so different from Master Choi's dojo, which she still attended every Tuesday and Thursday before school, Kim Era stood in front of 7 children aged 8 to 12. They were from the neighborhood. Most of them had never done a day of formal training in their lives. They were loud and distracted, and their stances were completely wrong, and one of the smaller ones had already tripped over his own feet twice. Era moved among them, adjusting a shoulder here, a knee there, patient in the way that only people who have been corrected 1,000 times themselves can be patient. She stopped in front of a small girl, 8 years old, dark pigtails, serious expression, who was struggling to keep her balance in the basic guard stance. The girl's weight kept pulling forward. Her feet were too close together. Her center was off. She looked like she was about to tip over, and the frustration on her face said she knew it. Era crouched in front of her. She placed 2 fingers on the girl's hip and gently shifted her weight back. She tapped the inside of the girl's right foot and moved it out just a few centimeters. She adjusted the shoulder. He stepped back. The girl stood. He was balanced. He looked surprised. "Stand here," Era said quietly. "This is your center." The girl straightened. Something shifted in her small face. Something between recognition and relief. Like she had found a place she hadn't known she was looking for. Outside the window, Seoul moved on. It always did. Era straightened and turned to the rest of the class. She watched them, these small, clumsy, completely earnest kids. And she thought about centers and about the things that could be taken from you and the things that couldn't, and about a rainy alley in Mapo and a voice that had cut through the dark. So, she breathed in. One of the boys at the back raised his hand. He was about 10, a little serious, a little watchful, the kind of kid who observed things carefully before speaking. "Teacher Kim," he said. "How do you know when to use it? What we're learning. How do you know when it's the right time?" The room went quiet. Even the small ones seemed to sense that this question was different from the others. Era looked at him for a long moment. Before she could answer, her phone buzzed on the bench beside her water bottle. She ignored it. It buzzed again. Then again, 3 times in quick succession, the pattern her brother used when something was urgent. She held up one finger to the boy. "Hold that question," she said. She crossed to the bench and picked up her phone. 3 messages from Dae-young. She opened them in order. The first said, "Era, there's something you need to know." The second said, "They found something during the trial proceedings. Something connected to what Han Jae-min was trying to expose. It's bigger than anyone thought." The third said, "They're saying there's another name. Someone above Kong. An Era. Someone who knew about you before the alley. Someone who knew you would be in that neighborhood that night." Era read the messages again. She stood very still. She looked up. 7 children were watching her from across the room, waiting. The boy at the back still had his hand half raised, his question unanswered, hanging in the air between them. She looked down at her phone. She looked back at the class. The room was very quiet.